This is The Extra Mile.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Justin Duncan. I'm always here with my favorite colleague and co-host, the G5.
Oh, man.
Hey, George, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you. Glad to be here on this early morning. Hey, if you are watching or listening, make sure to do all the things that, if you like what you're listening to or watching, that help us out. So,
Like and
appreciate that.
subscribe and
Yeah.
follow and unfollow and then follow us again if you like us that much.
Oh, man.
We want to refollow.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah. Double follow. So what's been going on? Pour some coffee because I'm freezing
Oh,
cold.
yeah.
Yes.
Fair enough. All right.
I'm so
The coffee is poured, or rather, it's ready to be poured. Let's do it.
Do you need some, Caleb? I got you.
What? Caleb's here? Hey, Caleb. Hello. Let me get you a microphone.
Is it full? Oh, now I've been touching all your lip, all that stuff with my hands. I washed them. I'm sorry. It was too nice that you become too gross.
Well, so I know you had we had a recent guest, Chuck Durham and Ed, and I really enjoy those chats. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful to have, at least comparative to me. I always sort of feel drawn to the older aged people.
Really?
Not that they are aged, but that they are definitely older than I. There's wisdom to be gained from people who've lived on the earth longer than you have, and what kind of pearls of wisdom that they might be able to offer you. And it's really wonderful to have conversations with people who have been focusing their life professionally, and then also having that spiritual connection with God, and letting both of them intermingle, and being an example of how to live. That's always something to look up to, and it's wonderful to interact with those people.
They have wisdom, and if we're patient enough to just listen, it really helps us tenfold. I mean, that's what the Proverbs are really, a lot of them really harp on is, hey, listen, hear my word. And a lot of them start with that phrase, hear my word, son. And it's this idea of passing down the wisdom. And to think that, this is probably, we don't know for sure, but let's just think King Solomon passing wisdom on to Rehoboam obviously didn't stick.
Yeah.
So it's like you really have to be listening as well, and not just listening, but actively listening means you're tuning and you're applying and things like that.
That's really kind of haunted me. If you read those stories, where you have David. David was such an amazing servant of God. Mm-hmm. David made mistakes, which is something to take note of. That he did sin. He did have moments of passion and of furor that it was going to lead him down to sinning, and then there are people in his life that helped him or caused him not to sin. It caused him to change his mind while he was going down that path. And then to have, his great sin with Bathsheba, the consequences of that sort of led to the splitting of the kingdoms, and the reign of Solomon, which we're not really given much revelation in the Bible about the reign of Solomon. I think that one period of time would have been so pivotal to world history. It would have been amazing to have volumes and volumes of stories from that time period and how secular history was affected by it. But you're exactly right. How do you inspire your kids to be a passionate servant of God? I mean, so like you take David wrote most of the Psalms, and there's such heartfelt exegesis, is that the right word? But there's such a heartfelt draw of connectivity between how am I feeling and can I articulate that in words. And studying those are amazing, and it changes your life, it changes your prayer life, and you see how human he was.
No, yeah, you do.
And then to have his son be at the beginning, right after David had died, and you could still see the influence in Solomon's decisions. God essentially, where is that? where God essentially sits down with him. He gives Solomon basically anything that he wants. Is whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And there's an amazing answer
First
that
Kings
he gives.
3.
Thank you, 1 Kings 3.
Yep, got you.
And so, let's see. I know I'm just swinging this now, but we're having our coffee talk, and we sort of led us to 1 Kings 3.
Verses 1 through 15.
Yeah, I'm just starting in verse 3. So 1 Kings 3, verse 3. Now Solomon loved the Lord, which that's the influence of David. After, he had just died. Solomon is just now crowned king, walking in the statutes of his father David, except he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. That's something that never went away until much, much later, generations and generations later, when they rediscover the law of God. There's the book of the law. And so the fact that they still burned incense on the high places means that there's still idolatry among the people of Israel. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night. And God said, "Ask what you wish me to give you." That's an amazing question. If God appeared right now to us, to me, in a dream, and he asked me that, what would you say?
I think we would all like to be, I pick wisdom like Solomon because of God's reaction. Is so happy and thrilled that he picked that, but I don't know if we could actually say that we would do that. It's really hard to say, but at the same time, he does ask us to do that.
Yeah.
Doesn't he not? He's like, ask and you will receive.
Yeah.
And so he asks us actually to do as Solomon did. And he gives us the ability to ask, and he will generously give. And we're talking about his wisdom, in fact, in that.
That is a fair
passage.
point, George. Well, I was thinking that, no. See, once again, I have those seeds in my mind of, like, God cares about us, but God doesn't care directly of him, like, appearing in a dream to me and talking.
Yeah, right. It's not.
But you're right. He does care about us.
He still does care about us. And we want to go back to the idea of Solomon and think, oh, when I pray to God, it's a lot like this genie in a bottle, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm not going to.
That's a very fair point. Okay, so I'm changing my tune now. You're exactly right. I've been swayed by your argument to say that God asks that question of us now.
Yeah.
Well said. Okay, so now I guess what is your answer going to be?
What's my answer?
I'm not asking you. It's just these are thought-provoking questions.
Yeah,
right?
no, it's a good question. So I think, I don't know about me. Like, I would like to think I say wisdom, right? I would like to think that when I do pray today, I do ask for wisdom. I do ask for humility. I do get embarrassed a lot. And I, because, those are kind of answered prayers.
Yeah.
And I do ask for certain things, but if you're asking for guidance on what to ask, I think a good place to go is the examples of Paul and Peter and the apostles when they're praying. What are they praying for?
Yeah.
How are they praying about other people? I think that's really important as well. You'll notice a lot of the times it's, asking them to know the right way, to be on the right path, to be filled with righteousness, to be filled with Christ. It's those types of phrases that imply spiritual growth. So the number one thing that they want to see from the people that they have talked to in the churches that they've started and the relationships that they've built, they want to see spiritual growth, deeper connections with God. And prayer should be that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's so great to look into the New Testament. I know that in my reading of the Old Testament, I've been so edified because it's almost like when you look at life, you actually just have all the answers. It's like having the cheat codes turned on, if you will. So I know we're just sort of winging this lesson over a coffee talk, but there's much to be deemed here. And so we continue on 1 Kings 3, verse 6. So that we're looking at the Old Testament now, right? We're looking at when the kingdom of Israel was established, and actually one of the most influential kingdoms on the face of the planet at the time. So verse 6, then Solomon said, you, he's talking to God, you have shown great loving kindness to your servant David, my father, according as he walked before you in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart toward you. And you have reserved for him this great loving kindness, this great mercy, that you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. So that's thankfulness, right? Thankfulness of heart. You're very kind. He's telling God how wonderful he is that these things have transpired and that he gets to sit on the throne. But notice how he doesn't say, hey, I'm really glad that I'm the king.
It's not about himself.
Yeah, he understands that his lineage is like, my father David was your great servant, and truly because of David's love and his obedience, through David the king, they ushered in this amazing new era of worship to God. And Solomon gets to continue it. Now, verse 7, now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Now, he's talking about himself. Yet I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. Isn't there a great parallel in the New Testament when Jesus tells him, let the children come to me? And that Paul's lesson repeatedly is that you have to become anew. You have to be renewed and become like a child.
Yeah, I mean, mine says, I am a young man and I am inexperienced. So he's humbling himself.
What version are you reading?
The
ESV?
The Net.
Oh, the Net.
N-E-T, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm doing the New American Standard.
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, the little child. So the concept of humility. You can see the humility in his response. Your servant is in the midst of your people, which you have chosen, a great people who are too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant an understanding of heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours? Now, God's answer, it was pleasing in the sight of the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. God said to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked for yourself long life, nor have asked riches of yourself, nor have you asked for a life of your enemies, for the life of your enemies, like you haven't wished ill on them, but have asked for yourself discernment to understand justice. Now, the things that God just said, David actually asks for in all of the Psalms. If you if you look at the Psalms, David asks for all of those things in the breadth of the Psalms.
Right.
And because Solomon had learned from the wisdom of David, you can tell the influence in his response. And this isn't like you can't. The other thing to note here is that Solomon can't have lied to God because God knows our hearts. And so we are literally seeing the heart of Solomon right now.
Yeah. And here it's contrasting what, in fact, if we need to put ourselves in God's shoes for a second and see from God's point of view what is important to him, right? So riches and long life and vengeance, those things which are important to us, he says, are basically saying is not necessarily as important as wisdom, discernment, making, this one says judicial decisions. Mm-hmm. And he also knows his position he's in as well. I think that's important as well. And he's aware of God's blessings, so he's thankful. And then he's assessing, what are the tools that I need to be able to do the job that God has given me well? And a big one there is wisdom. And so, in a sense, he's already very wise. But God is going to give him even more wisdom. And now he's able to do his job that God has given him more effectively. And that's really important because when you look at when Paul's praying about the churches and the other people, he's always saying, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you. I give thanks to my God always for you, grace to you. I do not cease to give thanks to you, remembering you in my prayers. I thank you. There's always that thankfulness that's there. And even though it's not mentioned here in 1 Kings, you can see that element.
You're exactly right. And that's what I'm saying is that there's an amazing duality, but the thing that's the same that we have from these stories as well as the stories of, almost 1,000 years later, whenever we have the New Testament writings versus thousands and thousands of years later where we are now in our timeline, that we as people are still the same. And once again, we're kind of looking with the cheat codes on. We've got the answers to our questions, and all of them are in these stories. So verse 12, 1 Kings 3:12, God answers, "Behold, I have done according to your words." So he grants him his things. He grants him wisdom and discernment and judgment. "Behold, I have given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, nor shall one like you arise after you." That's kind of sad, because wouldn't it be great to have a tenth or portion of the wisdom of Solomon? Verse 13, "I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there will not be any among the kings like you all your days. If you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commandments, as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days." Then Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and made peace offerings and made a feast for all his servants, etc. And so I am so inspired by that. And as you said earlier, that's really kind of the answer to our question. Whenever we ask things of God, which is we have that ability. We can pray to God and ask. And Jesus says that he gives
Matthew 7:7. Ask and it will
freely.
be given to you. Seek and you will find it. Knock at the door and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. Is there anyone among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? And he goes on to talk more about that.
Yeah, and so God knows we are his children, and so he knows what he gives us. And I think Jesus' point in the Sermon on the Mount is, if we ask for wisdom, he's not going to give us calamity. And that's exactly what he's saying. I mean, if he asks for food, you're not going to give him a snake, are you? Like, if we know how to give bad gifts, like physical gifts, God knows how to give us the spiritual gifts that we need.
Well, also, it's not that bad things won't happen when you have wisdom. It's that, well, now you'll better be able to handle those. You'll be more prepared to deal with the things that do come, because you're drawing closer to God. And when you do that, you gain, and I think I mentioned this in my sermon, you develop a deeper richness of the fruit of the Spirit inside you, if that makes sense. Love,
Yeah.
joy, peace, patience, kindness.
Is that sort of an acceptance of the physical life that we have? More of an understanding, so like the duality that we are physical beings, but we're also spiritual beings.
Yeah.
And the more tapped in we are to our physical, then we sort of lose our spiritual connection to God, and then we just sort of are wandering, groping around blindly, searching. And then as we're more tuned into our spiritual lives, the physical makes sense because we can justify it from the knowledge that these things are temporal and meant to test us.
Yeah. I see that. I think something that we have to be careful of as Christians, especially, is that when we can focus so much on the spiritual, we can forget how important the physical is as well. And we can see it as totally non-void, but we forget that God created it and it was good. And so, yes, Satan comes in and corrupts a lot of the physical elements, the world, and even ourselves. But that doesn't mean that it's not important, or it's not something that God created was good, and we need to be good stewards of as well. And so we can forget that and become what's called Gnostics, basically total Gnostics, and just think only spiritual. And that's not right either. We have to really appreciate what God has given us, be thankful, and use what God has given us. And that's the soul and the physical body.
See, I appreciate you saying that, because I'm once again just sort of revealing my blind spot. So a Gnostic, can you go a little further into that, like what that is? Because I'm a little ignorant.
I'm not like a scholar on it.
Well, but it's an interesting concept.
It was
a point of thought.
It was a heresy in like the first century, like the early church, basically.
Okay.
And it was a lot of problems. You see a lot of the church fathers often writing about it or to them, and they would spiritualize a lot of the things and say the physical really doesn't matter at all. Prominent, it says this. So if I just Google the definition, it says a prominent heretical movement of the second century Christian church. Partly a pre-Christian origin, Gnostic doctrine taught that the world was created and ruled by a lesser divinity, and the Christ was an emissary of the remote supreme divine being. That's that idea of Gnosticism. So it's that certain knowledge, that spiritual knowledge of whom enabled the redemption of the human spirit. And so it's all very spiritual, if that makes sense, and it doesn't focus any on the physical.
See, that's so interesting because James, I mean, a reading of James would say the exact opposite, because the connectivity between what we have in our spiritual lives and then the lives that we live and lead in our physical experience, they're one and the same. I mean, one begets the other, and the other begets.
Well, James is just so practical too. You know, it's such a practical book. It is. Well, that's a good thing you tied in James, because it's the wisdom literature of the New Testament, if you will. It's the Proverbs of
the New Testament.
Of the New Testament.
Interesting. I've never heard that said that.
Really? You obviously don't read the bulletin. No, I'm just kidding. I
was about to say, I'm sorry, George.
Yeah, don't be sorry. No, it really is. There's a lot of similarities of the two, where like they quote almost identical verses, or they allude to a lot of the same phrases, and it's all the idea of being practical and giving you practical ways that you can deal with, grow closer to God, and that's what it says in James. That's where that verse comes from: draw closer to God, but also, be the best Christian you can in this physical world that we live in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm further inspired now. I know that especially what you said about us seeking and praying, and how we have the ability to have that question asked of us that he asked Solomon in 1 Kings 3. And then what will our answer be? Is our answer going to be, I really want good health or wisdom? I don't know. Obviously, if you're hurting,
if
you
you
need
have
to
cancer,
be asking.
you
need to be asking God for
yeah.
health, and you need to be asking God for the things that are troubling you. Go to Him with these things, and as Jesus tells us, He's going to grant us the things that we need.
I mean, this is why it's important. For example, when my brother had cancer, we obviously prayed for good health, right? We prayed that he would get better. But during that time, we also want to be praying for just wise decision making. And we need to be praying that there's this idea of peace and then hope afterwards, so that, we can get through this and deal with these tragic moments and these constant hospital visits over and over again. Otherwise, it just becomes real depressing. And that's the amazing thing about prayer.
Yeah, my mother had a breast cancer experience, and I know that it made us all stronger. It definitely made me stronger as a Christian, and the need to be able to, or at least rather, let's say a calamity has befallen you, cancer, injury, you've lost your job. Anything can happen to us in this experience of life that we call, the physical life that we're experiencing now. And I almost have come to the conclusion that these things happen to further the kingdom of God, because it's an opportunity for us to see how we can help other people. So like, if you imagine the doctors who, like if you're an oncologist, you're going to work every day dealing with people who are absolutely terrified that they're about to die.
Yeah, I agree. We need to have a doctor on, by the way.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it. And then for you to come in and have a strong faith that's full of the wisdom of God in your heart, you can touch that person's life in a way that almost like, Ed's clients or the people who you minister to on a weekly basis, that if you are at a low, you can be reached. The door is open. And to be a servant of God in that moment, even though you're experiencing probably the worst days of your life, that you can still potentially reach out to someone and inspire them to come to God.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's why those things happen to us.
Well, just to go back, I mean, well, James chapter 1 tells us that we're going to go through trials and we need to endure those so as to receive a crown of life. So, yes. But to go back to the whole cancer thing, first of all, my brother's fine. He's an awesome kid. But at the same time, when you have cancer, you enter into this community, if you will, with other families that suffer with cancer and have kids around the same age that have cancer, and you get to know them, and you see how it affects different, marriages and relationships in different ways. And it's actually pretty sad because, some of the marriages don't last.
Mm-hmm.
So you're on this treatment for 3 years, and you have all these hospital visits, and you still have to work your job, and you still have to try to find a way to pay the bills and all that stuff, and these are really expensive, and some marriages just can't handle it, and you can definitely see the importance of spiritual maturity and drawing closer to God means I'm drawing closer now to my family. I'm drawing closer to the relationships that are really struggling. Those are really important. I think it's also important to note that when we're praying for other people, that we don't just say these things. We don't just say I'm praying for this person and then not follow that up with action. Because if all I'm thinking about is the spiritual, then all I'm doing is praying for them and not doing anything myself. If I'm thinking about the physical as well, then yes, I'm praying for them, and then I'm going and do something for them. And that should change the whole game. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm just digesting what you said. It's beautiful.
So, go do something.
Yeah, I mean, and be inspired. And so what a great lesson that we can learn, not only from the Old Testament, but the New. And that's how to apply the Old Testament. I know that every time I see your orange book there, which I am sort of more convinced that these are the superior notebooks to the Moleskines now, as I roll my eyes. But it reminds me of my first Bible I ever had, which had the Psalms, I think the Proverbs, it may have just been the Psalms, but the New Testament and the Psalms. They sort of omitted the Old because who cares? You can't find salvation in the Old Testament. At least that was the prevailing thought at the time of printing those Bibles, and how you really need to have the stories of the Old Testament to help fulfill your complete and rounded understanding of how we're experiencing life today. Because it's you almost see these calamities fall these people generation after generation, and how some of them fell into destruction and some of them were in destruction for a moment, but then they found spirituality, they found their walk with God, and they grew toward God. And these are the people we can say, well, we can either choose destruction, a la, Jehu or whoever, or we can, not Jehu. Jehu was a good servant.
I don't know.
Jerubbaal. I was trying to think of the big, the one who actually divided the kingdom after Rehoboam. Jeroboam.
Yeah.
Jeroboam.
The Boams.
Yeah, the Bowmans. That was a really bad. That was a really bad pun, Philip. I'm really sorry. The Jeroboams of the world, who they basically choose utter destruction.
Yeah.
And we want to learn from those examples, and so it's wonderful to put that in application. So hopefully that may inspire you to just sort of read 1 Kings, and learn about Solomon and
the Psalms and the Proverbs, and in fact, if you follow us on Instagram, you should follow Milwaukee Avenue because we're going through the Proverbs, actually.
That is
Instagram.
true.
So there you go.
Oh, my recordings?
No. Oh, yes, with your recordings. I am a little behind, but just catch up. I'll catch up. Don't worry.
I've listened to them on Spotify. I think it's so cool because it's like these recordings that I did in my closet, a few years ago are now on Spotify. That's really cool.
Oh, man. Well, one of the great treasures that I have is the little Bibles that the soldiers get. You know those?
Yeah.
I get G2s, if you will. I have G2s, like a little Bible he got when he was in the military in World War II.
Wow.
And, it's amazing seeing his signature in there and everything too. But also, to your point,
So that's your great grandfather.
Yeah.
G2.
Yeah, G2.
Wow.
To your point, it's really important to have the Psalms and the Proverbs in there, as you see a lot of those little Bibles have now, because it just adds more to it. And I imagine if you're sitting through war and you're experiencing a lot of emotions and feelings, why not read the writings of a soldier who was doing the same thing as
Yeah.
David? You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and then it'd be nice to also have First Samuel and Second Samuel so you could understand like when he was running from Saul and being hidden, etc.
True.
Amazing stories there.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, oftentimes you'll say, help me through this and in those Psalms and get me through this and, fight for me and against my enemies. And I imagine those actually being pretty comforting. We don't think about them being comforting now, but when you're in a foxhole, being pretty comforting.
Absolutely. Well, and yeah, if you find yourself in that situation, either in actual battle or in spiritual battle or in another type of battle where, you're hunkered down and things are going as hard and as loud and as scary as they can, find comfort in those words written in the Bible and then come to Christ.
Yeah.
That's our appeal to you.
So just some takeaways there. When you're praying, pray for spiritual maturity, spiritual growth, pray for others, and then follow that up with action as well, right?
Absolutely. And be inspired.
Yeah. And go so.